Guild. And this is the final talk in C, or the series of economic exploration talks that have been running here at the university this term. Before we go into tonight's talk, a brief talk about C. The C talks have been an incredibly brilliant student-led project from start to finish, and really have increased awareness and inspired students to talk about and think about macroeconomic issues. The C talks are something new to the University of Exeter and have brought about a new experience and opportunity for both students and staff here. C talks have been intellectually stimulating, yet cross-disciplinary, economics focused, yet topical event focused. So there's been a really wide spread of topics covered in these talks. They've also brought industry experts to campus, ranging from Evan this evening, who we're very lucky to have, to James Nixon, Chief Executive of Citigroup, and Carol Bagland, HSBC Regional Commercial Director. And it has been brilliant to see just how many students have participated in this opportunity, helping them to explore the changing industry and expand their own academic attitudes to economics. The C Talks are yet another example of the rich, vibrant variety of student-led projects we've seen this year at Exeter, and increasingly we're seeing students taking a lead and being empowered to run their own activities and events, whether it's through societies in the Students' Guild, volunteering, or students as change agents. And it really is great to see what happens when we empower students to deliver these kind of projects. Before we begin tonight's proceedings, I feel it's necessary to thank the Exeter Annual Fund for their extremely generous support in funding this project. Plus thank you to students as change agents, the Career Zone and the Business School, all who have provided their backing. And finally, thank you to the incredibly talented group of students from a range of backgrounds, ranging from ancient history to psychology, so it's not just economics, who have put on this series of talks. Imogen, the chair, who I remember coming to us with this little idea back in term one and how it's grown, to also Dan, Jake, James, Alex and Alex. So you should all be extremely proud. Tonight we have the added bonus that this talk is being streamed live and broadcast by XTV, our Students' Guild TV station. So thank you to them for their support and efforts. To get involved, whether you're in here in the Alumni Auditorium or watching at home, please use the hashtag CTalks and keep your questions and comments coming in through the night, because we really want to see them and put them to Evan. So I'm now going to hand over to the chair for this evening, Jess Burgess, and leave you in her hands. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name's Jessica Burgess, and I'll be chairing this evening, as well as having the pleasure of introducing Evan Davis, who's going to be doing his talk on why is London so dominant in the UK. Many of you may recognise him as the BBC Dragon's Den presenter, as well as the regular presenter on the BBC's Radio 4 Today programme and discussion show The Bottom Line. However, he's also appeared in one-off BBC shows like the award-winning 3-series episodes Made in Britain in 2011, which published an accompanying book on how the UK pays its way in the world. He's also involved in a special of the current affairs documentary programme, Panorama, called Breaking into Britain, discussing the journeys of migrants into the EU and the UK. In 6.5 years prior to working to the Today programme, he was the most senior economics reporter in the corporation, working as economics editor, a promotion that he received after working as an economics correspondent and an economics editor for the Newsnight programme in the 1990s. Even before joining the BBC in 1993, he was an economist for the Institute of Fiscal Studies at the London Business School He wrote numerous papers, articles and magazines, as well as published the book Public Spending, and co-authored the familiar Penguin Dictionary of Economics and New Penguin Dictionary of Business. A very impressive career path and a true inspiration to the graduating student. So it's a real privilege to get a prominent presenter here today at the University of Exeter. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Evan Davis.
Thank you very much, Jess. Thank you so much. That was a kinder introduction than I deserve, and thank you, Jack, too, who actually broke the news to me that Jeremy Paxman is leaving Newsnight, and he told me 1 minute ago, and I didn't know. Now, I'm going to talk about a topic that I think is very big and important for our country. It's a topic that combines bits of economics with bits of geography, and I have to say, if I had to come back in another life, I think geography might be my subject. I think geography is a really interesting discipline, but I love economics too. So I'm going to talk about London and the place it has in the UK, and I'm going to try and answer the question two questions. Why is London so dominant in our country? And secondly, what, if anything, should we try and do about it? Now, I did make a TV programme, 2 TV programmes on this topic. They were called Mind the Gap. They were on BBC 2 at 9 p.m. In March. And it caused lots of debate and discussion and abuse, which I received. And so you're getting the film. That was the film, you're getting the talk. And we'll do the musical next year. Just before we get going, how many of you are studying economics out of interest? Just out of interest? Okay, probably about half of you. How many of you, when you leave university, finish your undergrad degree or finish your grad course, how many of you have the expectation that you will live in or around London, just out of interest? My God, how many of you have the expectation that you will not live around London? Right, so it's probably at least 2 to 1 in favour of the ones who think they will go and live in London. And in a way, that says a lot about our country and the way it operates. Now, as someone who lives, I was born in the Midlands, actually, and then my parents moved to London when I was a toddler, so I more or less lived around London, the home counties of London, all my life. I've come to really love London, and I've also come to observe that it's changed enormously in the time that I've been living there in my professional career. It feels like a very different city, and something has changed, and it does feel much more different to the rest of the country than I think it did 20 or 30 years ago. You come out of London and it feels like you're crossing a bigger boundary, crossing a bigger border than it perhaps used to. And I want to explain that. But before I do, I want to give you a reflection, particularly those of you doing economics, on economic models and economic explanations of things. Because in a lot of economics, a lot of the models that you study, they have this curious self-equilibrating feature to them. So if you take an economic model on the demand for butter, the usual model would say, if the price of butter goes up, the demand for buying butter goes down. And that kind of means you tend to reach an equilibrium. If it was the price of butter goes up, the demand for butter goes up, then the producers would put the price of butter up, they would sell more butter, they'd be even richer, so they'd say, let's put it up again, and then you'd be in a kind of mad spiral of higher prices and ever higher demand. And that kind of doesn't work. Soon butter would be taking over the whole economy, we'd have nothing else if that was the case. So economists have developed and become very good at developing models that have a sort of self-correcting, normalizing feature to them. Butter price goes up, demand goes down, everything settles. The demand going down constrains the ability of the producers of butter to put the price up. If the price of a share goes up, then that share looks like much less good value, so fewer people buy it, and then the price settles at some price that reflects the value of the company it's a share in. If the price of houses go up, well, like butter, we would rather have fewer houses because the price of houses is expensive. So economists often deal in models that have an equilibrium. And what I think is funny is that, and perhaps the crisis has taught us this to some extent, the financial crisis. In the real world, lots of models are just madly kind of unstable. So what I observe is that when the price of houses goes up, people don't say, ooh, house is more expensive, I don't want a house, I'm going to buy less house because they're expensive. People say, the price of houses is going up, I better buy 2 houses in order to kind of get in on the action. And when the price of shares go up, people say they want more shares rather than fewer shares. So in the real world, you find that some of the models of economists that provide stability and equilibrium don't work. Models have unstable features about them. And I think economists tend to have not really been enough interested in the instability of things. It's just a sort of a sense, really, not a very specific criticism. But my model of London success is a model that is unstable. And it goes like this. It says that it's unstable for this very curious reason that London is a big city, and if you were doing a sort of traditional economic model, you'd say, well, the big city has some advantages, so it attracts people in, but it has some disadvantages, so it gets expensive when more people come in, and so people stop coming in. But it's not like that, you see. The talk I'm about to give you is a talk that says, when a city becomes big, it becomes more attractive, so more people want to come in, and it becomes bigger. It has that unstable feature that it sort of then spirals. And I think that's a kind of an important feature of the model or the description of what is going on in our country at the moment. A dynamic force that is causing a rupture in our country and which once gathers momentum seems to gather more momentum. That's the kind of feature we're trying to deal with. That's the essence of the London effect. Right, so what is this feature of London? Well, let me start by talking about London. Am I right to say that London is different from the rest of the country? Well, let me just tell you this. The productivity, the hourly value in the world economy, the hourly value of output per hour worked in London is 29% higher than the average for the UK. Now that's 29, of course, London influences the average of the UK because London is a fifth of the UK's economy. So if you take London versus the rest of the UK, it's more like 35%. So London is 35%, a third richer, let's say, a third more productive per hour worked than the rest of the country. In fact, in this country, we have a rather curious economy. Scotland is average hourly output. So park Scotland for one sec. London and the South East are above average. And the entire rest of the country is below average. I mean, that's in productivity terms. Because London pulls up the average so much that hourly output in the entire country is below average. And London and the South East, to a much lesser degree, are pulling that above average. So London has something. Its economy is highly productive. It is producing a lot more of its weight. And we have to explain that. That's really what we're trying to explain. Why is London so darn productive relative to other parts of the country in financial output terms? Now the key word, the one I wish I'd been taught when I was at university studying economics, but I don't remember hearing it a single time because economists don't do geography. The key word is agglomeration. This is the area which has become much richer in the years since I was at university. It's the study of the benefits of condensing people together. Agglomeration economics. You can wiki it and you'll find lots on it. Agglomeration economics is about what you get when you cram people into small space and let them get on with stuff. What advantages do you get? And the contention is that these agglomeration economies that London has are material. They're quite a significant thing. That by taking people, about 15% of the UK population, and squeezing it into a relatively small geographic portion of the UK, by taking people and squeezing them into London, into that area, you somehow make them more productive by doing that. Now that's very interesting, right? I mean, that is a very interesting phenomenon. By squeezing people together, you're making them more productive. And the agglomeration economics arguments, there are a number of them, but I want to go through them because they are really interesting arguments. And the most interesting, I think you will understand, it's around what economists call information spillovers. It's that when you cram people together, physically together, they learn more from each other than they do if they're dispersed. And indeed, that is why you were right to have come to a university where you're crammed together with a bunch of other students on a campus and where you copy each other, not too much hopefully, you collaborate with each other and you compete with each other. And the fact that you're all in the same location aids that. And it is exactly the same in London. Businesses come to London because they can copy, collaborate and compete with other businesses that are already in London. And it turns out that is a material advantage because information spills out very, very quickly from one business to the next. You see what works and you copy it. You have a serendipitous encounter in a coffee shop with someone and discover they're working on the same problem as you, so you collaborate. And psychologically, there's just something, if you're there and I'm here, I want to beat you a little bit more, with a little bit more vigor than if you're in another country or elsewhere in the country here. And so you compete more intensely. So the copying, the collaboration, the competing is more intense when you're physically confined. And that really, really matters. So what you see out of those three words, copy, collaborate, compete, is a tendency for lots of businesses to cluster. And that clustering effect means you want to be where the other ones are. Incidentally, it doesn't matter where it is, all that matters is you're where the other ones are. So, you take an industry like Hollywood. The deal makers all go to a small portion of Southern California. You take an area like Silicon Valley. The tech people all go to a small area of Northern California. You take the City of London. The banks all choose to go to two small areas in the capital, the city and Canary Wharf. And they cluster. And for some reason, they believe that they're better off being there where the rents are expensive, where the labour is expensive, where space is constrained. They're better off there than being 20 miles away or 30 miles away in St Albans. Why? Because they feel cut off in St Albans and they feel connected in the city. And you see advertisers in London. They're all clustered around Charlotte Street. The media clustered around, well, it used to be clustered around the BBC in White City. It's clustered around Soho, the media industry and the support industries. Clustering is absolutely endemic. And the odd thing about clustering is that it doesn't matter where it is, but you want to be where everyone else is, so everybody is trying to be in the same place. In our country, happens to be London. But there's a second agglomeration argument. So they're information spillovers, copying, collaborating, competing. There's a second argument, which is around very thick, effective labour markets. So if you think about moving to a small village somewhere, or moving to a small town somewhere, or moving to a relatively small city like Exeter somewhere, it has all sorts of advantages, but it has some disadvantages in that the number of opportunities, career opportunities, professional opportunities, are smaller than you get in a very big city. So ask yourself this question: how many people live within a 45-minute travel distance of where I'm located? And that will give you, if you like, an idea of how big a labour market there is within 45 minutes. Will the labour market I live in sustain a fingernail, a nail bar? Will it sustain a bank? Will it sustain a vet? Will it sustain an economic consultant? And obviously, the bigger the population, the more likely it is to sustain a variety of jobs and sustain a large number of people within each of those jobs. So a thick labour market has a number of advantages. It has a lot of advantages, in particular, for professional couples who might want to be quite fussy about the jobs, who might each want to be quite fussy about the jobs that they're getting. You might have two academics in a couple, and they each want to have a job. And it's no good saying, I'm going to move to Exeter and I'm going to move to Liverpool, because the other one's not going to get a job necessarily if you do that. Whereas if you move somewhere very big with a lot of opportunities, it's more likely you'll both get the ideal job. So a very thick labour market comes out of a scale city, and London has that scale in the UK. It has it in spades compared to everywhere else. There's a third advantage to scale in cities, and that third advantage is the presence of a variety of support industries. So if you ask why industry A wants to be in London, it's often because industry B is in London. And why is industry B in London? Oh, well, that's there because industry A is there. So a really very good example of this is the new, I suppose you'd call it tech hub in London, which is just like a mini version of Silicon Valley, tiny version of it. But what you have is tech startups and you have venture capitalists. And of course, these are enjoying a symbiotic relationship. The venture capitalists want the startups, and the startups want the venture capitalists. And so they can have a sort of perfect relationship if they're very close to each other. And then there are information spillovers between them as well. So you get a much more, effective communication between core industries and support industries, where you shove them all into a small part of town. And London is the place in the UK which is the default for doing that. So London has scale and density, incidentally. Scale and density brings you these agglomeration benefits of information spillovers, a thick labour market, and a juxtaposition of core industries and support services. And these mean London is a good place to locate. And I started by saying that this leads you to this unstable model, and it does, because what you get in London is the more people who come to London, or the more people there are in London, the more businesses there are, the more investment there is, the more support services there are, the more professional couples there are, the more want to come, because scale brings with it advantages. That if you want to be where the banks are, the more banks that come to London, the more the pull for other banks to be in London. And that is, if you like, the dynamic that means London sucks in disproportionate amounts of graduates. We've seen that here, that you expect to work in London, 2/3 of you, sucks in more than its share of graduates, sucks in more than its share of businesses, and sucks in more than its share of investment, because all of that wants to just be where all the rest is, and that's London. I have likened this to a kind of an analogy around nightclubs. And I don't know what the situation here is in terms of nightclubs, but I have been to places where there are several nightclubs in a row, Gran Canaria, for example, and they're all there in the Jumbo shopping centre, and 4 of them are empty, and 1 of them is heaving. Now, you see, the old-style economic model would be, this one is quite full, so I'm going to go into this other one because it's nice and empty, and then we'll all spread out and make a nice equilibrium. But nightclubs don't work like that. I don't care which nightclub I go to, I just want to go to one where there are lots of other people, preferably cool people. And so the cool people congregate in one nightclub, and that sucks in everybody, and you can't get a cloakroom for love or money, get to the cloakroom, but the others are all bereft and empty. Now that model might be slightly simplistic, but it does happen that way. Or if you're on holiday and you're choosing a restaurant, you're walking down the sort of beachfront, should we eat here, should we go there? What you tend to do is you say, well, this one's empty and that one's full. What do you think? You think, well, the one that's full must be better than the one that's empty, so I'm going to go to the full one. So this is, again, an example of a model where success begets success. And that, in a way, is my thesis It's not original to me, by the way, but that would be my thesis of what happens in London. These are the agglomeration economies. Now, economists have studied this it's become quite fashionable in the last couple of decades, and there's a sort of rule of thumb. It was from a survey of the literature done by the World Bank, actually, but their rule of thumb is this. If you double the size of a city, the hourly productivity goes up by 3 to 8%. So take two cities of 1 million people, right? And they're each producing 100 per hour on average. Shove those cities together, have a big earthquake, shove the cities into one city of 2 million, and the average productivity goes from 100 to about 105. Okay, that's the sort of scale of these agglomeration economies, of information spillovers and the like. That's the kind of rule of thumb. Now, London, when you look at the UK, is not twice as big as the next biggest city, but it's kind of, well, actually, if you take Manchester City, it's what, about 500,000 to 1 million. But if you take the Manchester built-up area, it's about 2 million. So you're going to double it and double it again to get to London, really. So that would say London has a productivity gap relative to Manchester caused by the scale advantages it has of maybe 5 to 10% or 10 to 15% as a result of the just multiplying up the agglomeration economy's rule of thumb. So that is the theory. London is sucking in. Its productivity benefit arrives from the fact that it sucks in its unfair share of the talent in the country, and it sucks that talent in because it uses that talent very well. The agglomeration economies use that talent well. It makes people productive, and so productive people particularly keen to get there. And that's what's happened in London. Now, I think all of these arguments that I've given, not only do I think they're true, by the way, but I also think they are more material in the kinds of industries Britain specialises in. They're more material in commercial services, knowledge industries, I hate that phrase, but let's call them knowledge industries, law, professional services, advertising, headquarters functions, financial services, technology. These are the kinds of industries that want to cluster most of all. It's where the brain work is happening, where these kind of information advantages are so important. And so it's no coincidence that the UK hub for the kind of top jobs is the biggest city, and that big city keeps attracting those top jobs because it is the UK hub for them. It all becomes self-reinforcing. Right. That's the sort of line of the argument. I just want to say, by the people keep saying, oh, well, we don't need to all be in the same city because we have Skype these days and the internet has made geography irrelevant. And the very paradoxical thing is that the very industry that apparently made geography irrelevant is the one that has the most obvious sense of clustering. You know, technology is the most clustered industry. In London, the technology sector is clustered around one bloody roundabout within a sort of walk of 200 metres of one roundabout in Shoreditch. In the world, technology clusters in Silicon Valley. It is the industry that says geography matters. And far from believing that you Skype your venture capitalist, no, you bump into him at Costa and have a serendipitous conversation that makes that work. Now, what is the implication of this argument that I've given? I don't want to talk too long because I want to get away at 7:30, and I want to give you a chance to ask questions on this or any topic, incidentally, whatever you like, Dragon's Den, whatever you want. What are the implications of this argument for the UK in particular and the world in general? Well, look, one big implication, and I think this is interesting, if you buy it, is that the world, as it moves away from physical labour towards more brain work and to more intellectual activity, in which value added is increasingly, if you like, intellectual property, what it says is, it's an affirmation of the power and importance of hubs and big cities. Now, hubs and big cities are not the same, because Cambridge is a small city, but Cambridge is a hub for lots of technology and innovation in this country. So it's really an argument for hubs and clustering, but it's an argument for big cities because these often provide the default places for these hubs to reside. So hubs. It's all about hubs, okay? The world is about hubs, and increasingly so. And the world is about cities, and big cities in particular, which do seem to be places where a disproportionate amount of stuff gets done. I know McKinsey did a report, the consultants did a report on the world's biggest cities. I can't remember the figures, but I mean, it's McKinsey, I mean, it's, who knows? But you know, that a very disproportionate amount of the world's output comes from the big cities, the big metropolitan areas, but more interestingly, a disproportionate amount of the world's innovation comes out of the world's big urban areas. It's very interesting that big cities fire above their weight in terms of innovation in the world. So that's one implication, the power of hubs, hub power, hubonomics. It's a sort of hubtastic world that we're entering. Now, I might just be biased because I love the feeling of a pull towards where other people are, and this might be aesthetic. Because when I go on holiday and people say, let's go to an empty beach, I don't want to go to an empty beach, I want to go to one where there are lots of other people, just because it's more interesting. So there might be an aesthetic thing here going on, but I think hubs, sucking people in, is an important force that's driving the world at the moment, and I observe that London, which was once considered one of the world's big cities, is not really one of the world's mega cities, is it? I mean, you've got the Tokyo, Osaka, you've got Mexico City, Sao Paulo, all these, Lagos in Nigeria, you know, these are mega cities that are just sucking people in because in every continent, for every level of development, it seems like big cities have a certain pull. So that's implication number one. Implication number two is for the UK and the shape of our country. And I think what this argument suggests, and I'm not saying we should do this, but what it suggests is that maybe if you wanted to rebalance the British economy from, in north-south terms, that the south has a model of a huge great hub with feeders into it from the area around it. So it's not a network, the south, it's a hub and spokes. And that model is not what you have in other parts of the country, which are much more like networks of different places with less obvious centres. I'm caricaturing a bit, but the north of England has a string of cities, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, Hull, Sheffield, a string of cities that are, if you like, much less in the hub-spoke shape than you will find in the southeast. And each of those cities has identity. Each of those cities has an expectation that it will have a certain amount of activity and a certain amount of culture, for example. So if you take the comparison of where we put arts and culture, in the south, we tend to put it in London. We don't say Bromley has an opera, or Putney, even though Putney is Bromley is a big place. We basically think of shoving it all in the centre, and the people of Bromley, Putney, Guildford, St Albans, these people just think, if I want culture, I go into London to get it. In the north of England, it's slightly different. We have a much more networked model. We have museums in Manchester, we have museums in Bradford and Sheffield, and we, in some sense, as a deliberate form of policy, have tried to spread everything out and make sure everybody gets a little piece. And so the thing to consider is, if you were redesigning other parts of the country, would you do it much more on the London model? Would you say culture, economy, work are better designed around hubs and spokes? So you get the agglomeration economies that London has achieved. And that might mean, for example, saying, hey, look, we want a bigger second city. We want Manchester or Birmingham to be a second city of real scale. And we're going to design trains and transport and buses about forming that as a hub. and we're going to put all the culture there, and we're not going to give everybody a little piece of their own museum and their own art house. We're going to put it all in the middle of this one place, and we're going to make it easy for people to get to. Would that be a better way of delivering some of these things? Would it, in other words, be good for the north of England or the Midlands or the southwest to model itself on the London model of the hub and the spoke? Now, I mean, I think what it would take to do that would be a lot of spending on infrastructure. I think actually the potential in the north of England, where you have millions of people, 5 to 7, 10 million people, all within potential, smallish distance of each other, between the Pennines, between Leeds and Liverpool. It's not that far, really isn't that far. I think Manchester-Liverpool takes, an hour. Leeds-Liverpool is just a joke in terms of transport. Could you compress that to become one travel-to-work area, with Manchester potentially as a centre of it and having a sort of hub power in the middle of it? Well, these, I think, are some interesting questions we could ask. They might be questions that would mean talented people like yourselves would have a choice of another big urban centre that they could gravitate towards rather than just towards London as the default. Would it be possible to have a bigger, vibrant cultural scene if we didn't spread it so thinly but concentrated it in one place? And if we wanted to do that, would we be able to agree on what the place was? I mean, people of Leeds would perhaps think it shouldn't be Manchester, and the people of Liverpool would perhaps agree with the people of Leeds, but not agree with the people of Leeds about where it should be if it isn't Manchester. You can see all sorts of problems arising from that. But I think it is potentially the case that we do have a lesson to draw from the agglomeration economics that seems to have worked in London's favour. And I'll finish on this point really, but I don't think we should assume that London is ruining the United Kingdom. It might be that London is really making the United Kingdom, that by shoving so much into one city, we get a lot of bang for our buck from it, and we make our lawyers more productive, and we make our banks more productive, and our science more productive, and our arts more productive, and we really get something by having it all agglomerating. I don't presume that it isn't working, but I think it is a pity that we offer so few choices to the folks like you who said you expect to move to London. That it's just such an obvious path. That's what you do, because that's where the top jobs are. And if you want top jobs, you move to London. And if you want to employ someone in a top job, then you put your job in London in this kind of self-reinforcing model. And I think we've had a particular dilemma in this country that we want to keep feeding the London beast. We want to build London. We want to keep investing in infrastructure in London to make it possible for London to accommodate more people, to bring people in. And to some extent, it has meant that we haven't had any money left to make the rest of the country as attractive as London. So as London has grown and has sucked in people, we've said, oh God, we better build Crossrail, and we better develop the East Side with the Olympics, and we better attract money into Battersea to redevelop Battersea because that needs redeveloping. And by the time you've spent it all on London, there hasn't been enough left elsewhere. And my sense is that we should at the very least try and think of ways in which we can offer choices. People may still choose London, in which case, fine, I'm not going to ban people moving to London. But I think as a country we can probably do better to offer those of you who think automatically you have to live in London some choices. And that might mean saying, okay, we're going to hone in on one or two centres where we can offer real critical mass. But I do hope that we can just do a little better rather than assuming that it has to be London, successful as London is. I will end my talk there, and happy to take questions on that or anything else you want to ask about. Thank you. We have mics going round, is that right? Right, who wants to ask questions? And I think you're live on XTV. Always the first question's the most difficult one.
If you need someone to start, do our continental colleagues, say Paris and Berlin and what have you, do they enjoy the same syndrome that you're describing or suffer from it?
Right, so do our continental colleagues enjoyed the same agglomeration economics and the same sucking in. Right, so I think the short answer to that is it varies quite markedly. And I think Britain's history has led to much more concentration than most of the other countries around Europe. So, as it happened, Greater Paris is not hugely different in France to London in the UK. Germany is very different because Germany has much more spread out cities. Berlin is much less dominant than London. And then it has its manufacturing heart in the Ruhr, in a string of cities, Düsseldorf, Cologne, on that side. So you've got a very different picture in Germany. The United States is obviously different. The United States has several hubs: Washington politics, New York business, LA entertainment and culture, Silicon Valley technology. So London is all of those things in the UK to what the US has. And I think, as I look at this, different countries have different experiences depending on their history. We are geographically compact, so in some sense it meant that we were going to become more likely to have a huge centre that just kind of filled up the whole country to some degree than other places. Our history was more concentrated. Germany was a set of provinces that, Germany wasn't quite a nation in the way that Britain was, or England was, going back further. Italy's a kind of interesting case because Italy's kind of, again, was a fairly recent nation. It was a set of provinces. Venice was very powerful in history. Milan was, Naples was, Florence was. So they just somehow had more history. But the really big thing, I think, about the UK was the way in which our industrial history shaped the power of London, that we effectively didn't turn out to be as successful at manufacturing as Germany, and manufacturing had a natural tendency to spread out. So steel was in Sheffield, near where the raw materials and the coal was, and the mines and the energy. Mills were around, the textiles industry was where the power was, from water, for example. So a lot of that industry spread out, and London was the kind of white-collar commercial capital. And when we, for whatever number of reasons, gravitated towards commercial industries, it meant that London became a very dominant centre. So the industries we gravitated towards were ones where agglomeration mattered and which all had a historical heart in London. And I think that has really meant London has been much more dominant here than the equivalent cities in most other places. So every country has its own story, and I think Britain's has been, for industrial and economic reasons, historic and geographic reasons, been one that has led to more concentration. Another question. Jess is my glamorous assistant carrying the mic round.
Couldn't the BBC itself be seen as an example, because the experiment to relocate to Salford, although it's created a media hub, hasn't taken other things from an agglomeration with it, and there's still a feeling from within the BBC that if you work in a region, you haven't made it unless you work in London?
Well, that's a very good question, because what the BBC did by taking thousands of people out of London, putting them in Salford, beefing up Salford, and incidentally, and I'm not sure about the facts on this, so don't quote me, but taking some resources out of the other parts of the UK and focusing them into one hub in Greater Manchester. The BBC is an absolute case in point of trying to sort of build agglomeration economics elsewhere. Has it worked? Has it failed? Too soon to say. Way too soon to say it has failed and hasn't created anything. I think it has probably had some positive effects. I mean, I feel it has made a material difference. So compared to what was before, there is an alternative. Now, in 20 years' time, we'll know whether it's really taken off. But at the moment, you're on the very, very early stages of it. So at the moment, there's still a lot of people shuttling up and down the Virgin West Coast line, getting from London to do things in Manchester, of whom I am one, because Dragon's Den is filmed in Manchester. So it's like the London people get on the train, go to Manchester, come back down to London, and that's not really agglomeration economics in action. But in 20 years' time, maybe the future equivalent of Dragon's Den, well, actually Dragon's Den will still be going then, but I mean, I'll still be presenting it. But the, maybe when they come to replace me in 20 years' time, they will say, why don't we get someone from around Manchester, and then you'll just have a bit more of a kind of a buzz around it. And I have noticed that the presence of breakfast TV in Manchester, and everyone said it's going to be hard to get the guests. Who are the guests going to be if they're not, there aren't any guests in Manchester? And it is true, breakfast TV does have to have lots of guests down the line from London. But actually they've made much more effort to find guests in Manchester. And, believe it or not, there are people you could find to talk on television programmes in Manchester, but who's going to bother finding them if we're all in London? So I think it does have an effect. I'm a big supporter of it. I mean, if it fails, it fails. It's not that big a deal. But I think it does have an effect, and I think it is better than what went before, actually. But it's going to take. It's a generational thing to see whether it works, not a 2 or 3 year thing.
I wonder whether there's one missing ingredient with your agglomeration economics, and that being the role of foreign talent and the way in which foreign talent in London, Silicon Valley, Hollywood, Shanghai, Singapore, Dubai, wherever, in particularly core cities, they have had an absolutely fundamental role in the success of these types of regions, particularly in professional service firms, financial firms, engineering, IT. And so I wonder whether that is a key component to the story. And the one concern potentially that I think this country has is we have a looming paradox where economically businesses understand the vital importance of migrants, and this university could vouch that very clearly. But politically, we're sending very, very ambivalent signals about their important role for this society and this economy.
Right. I'm not going to, because I've worked with the BBC, I can't venture an opinion on some issues. And if I have said anything that sounds like an opinion, obviously you've misunderstood me and my whole thrust of argument. But so I won't get drawn into the migration debate. But you're absolutely right. Particularly, let's call it the top talent level in migration, about which there incidentally is much less controversy than the kind of the bulk immigration of people at lower skill levels. The top talent level, there is no doubt that level has global choice, and those people are generally quite attracted towards the biggest cities and the bigger centres. And that is why Britain has a dilemma, because one of the things that some people would say is, look, just take some stuff and take it out of London and shove it up elsewhere, put it up in Manchester or Birmingham or, Market Harborough or whatever, and it'll be better there because they need the jobs there, or because it gets it out of London, releases pressure on London. And why people will say, well, hang on a minute, if you take my biomedical research centre and move it to Market Harborough, we won't get the people that we will get in London. And the people are not choosing between London and Market Harborough or London and Sheffield. They're choosing between London, Madrid, Paris, Silicon Valley, and London is the British candidate in this global contest. And so we've got to make London attractive to that particular very attractive group of people. So I think it is absolutely right what you're saying. And I think, incidentally, it is just the global equivalent of the agglomeration argument. It is that those people want to go to the places that make them very productive. I didn't go into an argument, which I could have, which we did in the TV programme I made of it, that what you also get in these big cities is you get consumption opportunities for the people that are attracted to them. So, putting it crudely, you get BMW dealerships where the BMW people are, and the BMW people thus go to where the BMW dealerships are. And so, yes, those big cities attract those talented people. The talented people attract the kind of support services and consumption opportunities that those talented people value. That attracts more talented people in, globally talented people in. And all those agglomeration arguments apply at a global level. And London is the UK candidate in that. And that does make it harder for other parts of the UK to compete. So Manchester is going to struggle to compete with London in that race. However, and this is my answer to that, Manchester is competing with a lot of different cities. It's competing with, say, the French equivalent of Manchester, Lyon. And Manchester can try and make itself, it may not be another London, but it might well be a better than Lyon equivalent of a European city. And so you want to think about what all your cities are doing and how they're firing. You want to make them as attractive as possible, but you don't necessarily want to think, gosh, it's London versus Sheffield, because that's maybe in the global, I hate the phrase global race, David Cameron uses it all the time, but I mean, if you do think of there being a contest between a dozen or so big urban centres around the world, you want London to be as attractive as it can be, you know. You're very welcome to ask about other things, by the way. I know that you don't feel you have to try and sort of flatter me by talking about the talk.
Thank you. I think you've walked a really fine line between selling or supporting London and also wanting to offer an alternative. And a few times you've said things like, we could just shove things up there. And I wonder who you think the we is and how we perhaps affect this change. Is it government policy? Is it people like the BBC just kind of going for it? Or who is the we and how do they do it?
It's a very good question. So actually, I mean, I talk in these casual ways about shoving things here and there. There are things that government can shove around. And most of those are public sector things, which you clearly can shove around. And I think you can affect some change like that. We used to shove things around quite a lot using regional policy of one kind or another. So you bribe people, you use carrots and sticks. You can give them tax incentives to move around, and you can restrict location. In the TV programme, and I had not understood any of this till we started making it, we go through the history of Birmingham, which was a highly successful city in the 50s and 60s, and so successful, government saw it as its job to constrain it because it was too successful, and the north, Birmingham was part of the south, and the north needed more jobs, so we needed to stop Birmingham growing, and there was something called the Control of Offices Act in the 1960s that said you can't build offices in Birmingham. It's almost that crude. And it's a very interesting experience, really, as whether that sort of thing, so constrain this in order to get it to parts of the country that need it more. It didn't really work because it's partly what we're just talking about. If you constrain it here, it doesn't go to the bit of the country you want it to go to. It goes somewhere completely different. And so outside the country. So you haven't really achieved what you wanted. And if you do that, you're losing agglomeration benefits that might be quite material. So we don't really know how important the argument I've given is, how true it is. But we don't need to know. We can let people make their own mind up. And if they all want to come to London and pay big rents, then that's probably telling you that they feel it is quite important, what I'm saying. If they all spill out of London and go to Birmingham, Manchester or Madrid, that's telling you the argument I'm giving isn't very important. So, I mean, I'm wary that government can control those things, but I'm very aware that government might want to influence those things. And I'm also aware that government can make places attractive without forcing people to move there. So we can do a lot for the big cities of the UK and the areas around them without forcing people to move into them. And that might be focusing infrastructure and resources around a few key hubs and saying these are places which we're investing more in, focusing on, and creating maybe small tax incentives to settle there, or whatever. That's really it. Got one right at the sort of near the back there.
Hi. It seems to me that infrastructure is quite important.
Yeah.
So at the risk of getting a little bit political, I want me to ask about your views on HS2.
I thought you would ask that.
it seems to me that that's been sold as something of benefit to northern cities. But it also seems to me, politically, it seems to have been sold that way. But it also occurs to me that it could just kind of help London suck the life out of those cities. And I wondered if you...
Well, let me give you, I'm not going to give you the answer on HS2, okay? That, again, I have no official opinion on that. But let me say this. It is possible, it is quite possible, HS2, you could say, I don't care whether HS2 sucks people into London or sucks people into the north. If HS2 has the effect of sucking people into London, what is that telling us? It's telling us that people out there are, for some reason or other, feeling like they want to be or need to be in London. That's kind of telling you that everything I'm saying is even more true than I think it is. And so it might be that it's actually doing good, even if it sucks people into London. It might be that the vision for this country should be, it's a country called London, with this bloody great suburb called, the United Kingdom. Now, I'm not going to say I think it ought to be that or it would be that, but I'm just saying that it's not necessarily a disaster if it just means people can connect and get to where they want to go much more easily. So that's my first point, actually. It might suck people into London. Definitely true, and that may not be a bad thing. It remains to be seen. If that's what people want to do, maybe we've just made it easier for them to do what they want to do. Look, in general, I think we have probably put much too little weight on links between cities outside London. I think the cities of the north are pathetically connected. One of the contributors to our programme, we didn't use it in the programme, said, the journey between Leeds and Manchester would be 4 minutes if it was in South Korea, and it's basically an hour in the UK. It peters its way through the Pennines. It's just, and it's just pathetic, really. And it does mean that while you can commute between these cities, it's quite a barrier, really. And so for people locating there, the labour market isn't as big as it really could be if you made one travel to work area out of Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester. And so I think that the agglomeration arguments tell you that should be your priority. But the agglomeration arguments also tell you that connectivity is very important. And so the agglomeration arguments would say, if you could make Manchester as close to London as Cambridge is now, that is going to give Manchester quite a hoist. I mean, that's quite good for Manchester, right? I mean, that Manchester or Lyon, you're a second-tier world company thinking about Manchester or Lyon, and you know that in Manchester you're an hour from London. That's quite a, that's quite a big boost to what Manchester can sell itself on. I think the arguments go all ways, really, but I think those are the kinds of factors. Connectivity is good, is one argument. Connectivity between the smaller level, the kind of city connectivity within city, across city, is very, very good. And so those augur in favour and against HS2. Say one more.
We've got a question from Twitter.
Oh, excellent.
From Ron Leong, which is London's growth sustainable?
Right, so London actually appears to be going through something of a rather frothy bubble at the moment, and everybody's getting their house prices valued, and at the moment it is really very hard to see how all of those of you who say you want to come to London or expect to come to London, how on earth you expect to find a place to live, I don't know. And so something a little bit funny is going on in London. I think it's just gone a bit, perhaps going a little bit awry at the moment. There seems to be a kind of an attraction to foreign money to buy investment properties that makes it hard for people to buy properties. Some of those properties, too many of them are unoccupied, so we're building apartments to watch them sit in the dark there with nothing going on in them. So I think there are some problems in London, and I think London is hitting some physical constraints. But the truth is, we can fit a lot more people in London if we want to, by investing in it. London is not a particularly dense city. It's by far the densest place in the UK, but central London is about a third as dense as Paris, central Paris. Quite large areas of London are houses 4 stories high. You could easily, without building tower blocks, I mean, we're looking at tower blocks, but you could quite easily build 7-story buildings that would get a lot more people in. You could put them very dense, with very high quality of life. So areas of London could be more dense, can fit more people, can fit more business. So I don't think we're hitting the constraints, but if we're going to make it work, you are going to need to spend and invest quite a lot in it. And this is back to this whole argument, feeding the beast, making it livable, creating room for growth in London seems the right thing to do in the global race, but feeding the beast, if it leaves you no money to feed the rest of the country, is not necessarily the right thing to do in the national race. And I think that is the central dilemma. But I think there is definitely room for London to grow. And you can go around swathes of London in the east, where there's just so much room to build if you want to build. And around Battersea, they're planning to build loads, but there's just empty, vast empty spaces. Where I live in Earl's Court, they're about to build 10-story buildings, where there's very little going on. So there's a lot of growth you can put in London. There really is. Last one. Anyone want a last one? Okay, last one. Over there, the guy with the T-shirt. Yeah, this guy. Well, the T-shirt and the other thing.
Yeah, just a quick Dragon's Den question.
Thank you.
I was just wondering about the due diligence process and at what stage that happens in relation to the show going out. So does it happen before the show goes out or afterwards? And also then what percentage of deals, whether it's the ones we see or the ones we don't?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so there's some due diligence before they get into the den. Quite a bit. There's a kind of interview, audition. They're taken through records are looked at. So that happens before. Then they go through the den experience, which is recorded and edited, and the dragons say invest, and then the dragons then do their own due diligence process, not a BBC one. The prior one is BBC, the post one is Dragon's own, and in the course of that process, you will not be surprised to hear a number of the deals that are hands shaken on in the den don't proceed. Mostly, that will emerge after the thing is aired, or quite a lot of the time it's after the thing is aired. Sometimes it's before it's aired, and then often it won't air at all. It won't make it to air. But usually it just takes a long time. A lot of the time, and I would say, I don't know what the actual hit rate is now, but a lot of the time, and I think this is one of our problems, the entrepreneurs pull out of the deal. So in the early days, what would happen is the dragons would make the offer in the den, then they would look at the business and say, no way am I really going to invest in this after the filming, because they would look at it a bit more closely and realise that there was some complication that hadn't emerged. Now, more often, the entrepreneurs say, I don't really want the money, I found someone else, or I've got another chance now, and that is sort of more of a problem. So that the entrepreneurs do their due diligence and reject the offers. So a lot of the offers that are shaken hands on don't happen, and that's usually after it's aired. A few of them have ended in total and unpleasant acrimony. But I think you're talking about very few of them. And a lot of them end successfully and do actually happen as planned. And about 2 have been, massively successful. Probably you can name better than I can the most successful. What's the most successful one? Say again? Levi Roos, reggae sauce, yeah, who's multi-millionaire. So, I mean, they're quite a lot of them don't happen. I guess it's like when you make an offer on a house, isn't it? There's a lot of water that can spill between the offer and the kind of the final deal, and that happens. It's a good question, though. All right. Well, it's been enjoyable talking to you. Thank you for your questions. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, I just want to say another huge thank you for coming down from London to come and talk to us this evening.
No, it's a great pleasure. You're well connected.
It's been really interesting hearing a bit more about the agglomeration economics, something I hadn't heard of before I came to this talk today. As a token, I think we got the token of appreciation. We've got a bottle for you.
Oh, that's very kind of you.
Another round of applause, and thank you again for coming along this evening.
I'll try not to drink it on the train home. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Yes, great stuff. Thanks very much. Good.
Are you a student? No, I'm an academic, senior lecturer. And there is an opportunity to start to